everybody, and welcome to our session on bees and trees. We're going to start with some introductions so you know who we all are. I'm Monica. I live in Wales and I'm a beekeeper.
Hello, my name is Janet. I'm the Programme Manager for Bees for Development. I'm also a beekeeper here in Herefordshire in England.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Milan Weeks-Verijn. I'm a project manager for Bees for Development, and I'm also a beekeeper and currently buried 20 centimeters below a layer of snow in France.
My name is Giacomo. I live quite close by to Janet. I'm also in a small way a beekeeper, and I am a project manager and course director at Bees for Development.
Thank you. Well, as you hear, we all work with Bees for Development, which is an international NGO based in Monmouth in Wales. And for nearly 30 years, we've been collaborating with beekeepers all over the world. What do? We listen to people, we hear their stories, and we seek to support the deep knowledge they hold about bees. In our session this afternoon, you're going to take a journey around the world meeting bees and beekeepers. There will be time for questions. Please write your questions in the Q&A box and we'll respond to them at the end of the session. And we'll also have a Zoom room for chat afterwards. So why bees and trees? Well, because beekeepers are guardians of the forests. Bees need trees, and beekeepers protect the forests which feed and shelter their bees. These beekeepers hold the indigenous wisdom of the forest, understanding the flowering of trees and the seasonal lives of the bees that depend on them. They are the experts. Their expertise lies in understanding the forest and the bees. Expertise that's been gathered over many, many generations, knowing the special trees and shrubs which bees visit at different times of year, the best nest sites, the seasonal life of the bee colony, understanding the health of local bee populations and the diversity of flowering plants on which the bees depend. Beekeepers hold this knowledge for their communities. In healthy forests, bees are healthy. Beekeepers match their practices to the bees' natural lives. Bees are not owned, they're not controlled in any way. They are an integral part of their natural ecosystems, co-evolved with the flowering plants and totally interdependent. We want to introduce you to some of these beekeepers. They maintain the forests and they harvest its products in completely sustainable ways. Ways that are in harmony with their local ecology, with their biodiversity, and with their communities. What you'll hear about today will be different from everything you hear about bees and beekeeping in industrialized nations. We're not considering bees as livestock. They're not units of production kept in intensive agri-industrial conditions in degraded ecologies. Indeed, where bees are kept like this, we shouldn't be surprised when they suffer the same problems as other intensive livestock. Instead, today, we're going to visit forests in Ethiopia, Zambia, Ghana, Suriname, and India. You'll hear about places where beekeeping is an ancient craft, perfectly tuned to its environment. You'll also hear from places where restrictions on access to the forest, logging and poverty are forcing people to change their practices, but where the knowledge and skills of working with bees are being protected and passed on to others. And finally, we'll return to Britain to hear about honeybees here and the restoration of a healthy population of wild bees. These bees are part of our indigenous fauna. Where our wild honeybee population is healthy, the bees in beekeepers' apiaries can be healthy too. So now I'm going to hand over to Milan, our first speaker, who's going to tell us about forest beekeeping in Ethiopia.
Thank you, Monica. What a wonderful introduction. Yes, maybe we can put my screen up there. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'm going to talk about the forest beekeepers in Southwest Ethiopia. But first, just a quick geographic refresher. Now here we have Ethiopia. It's in the east of Africa, and the beekeepers that I'm going to talk about are situated around that area, so Southwest Ethiopia. It has wild, abundant flora and fauna, and it is a stark contrast between the other areas that exist in the country. Where we find degraded land in the north, we find lush and strong ecosystems in the southwest, like this one. Beekeepers here are key actors keeping this richness of biodiversity intact. The beekeepers proceed in a completely different way than the Western societies used to with beekeeping. There's an ultimate collaboration between beekeepers and bees. Somehow you cannot actually say that these people are beekeepers. They live in harmony with the bees. Now on this picture, on these two pictures, you can see beekeepers, and there are actually two hives in the tree. Maybe you've spotted already. One is here, and the other one is there. They start the annual beekeeping work after the rainy season by cleaning and repairing the empty hives and making new ones to replace those that are at the end of their life cycle. This is often work done with all the beekeepers of the village together. This hollowed out log will become a beehive. One day they will make hives for one person, and the next day they will make them for the other person. To make the hives, they use locally sourced materials. A carefully selected tree will give them several logs that they will hollow out, as you can see here. Smoothing it on the inside with a lot of handwork and dedication. Once the logs are prepared, the insides will be smoked on a small smoldering fire with herbs. This is knowledge passed on through generations, and it shows that this is the best recipe to attract migrating swarms. A lid is created from grass, and the spathes of a palm tree will function as protection against weather condition. On this picture, you can see a young boy going to the market selling the spas for the hives. It will increase the longevity of the log hive. Lastly, all of it gets bundled together with lianas, ready to welcome a new bee colony. Now, as they closely observe the flora around them, they know exactly the right time to hang the hives, when they see honeybees starting to source nectar from certain flowers. And when that time is there, the beekeepers will go into the forest to hang their hives. These are often locations that go as far as several days' walks away. Once arrived at a suitable tree, they hang a hive high up, skilled climbers as they are. One beekeeper could have between 50 and 300 hives, all hung in trees. As the beekeepers move through the woods and hang the hives with large distances between them, the hives become distributed around the forest, many being occupied by swarming bee colonies. And you could say, how inefficient? Why not just hang them all in the same tree? Well, a bee colony naturally does not nest near other established colonies if it has the choice. Bees have been practicing social distancing long before us. You might think it is inefficient, but it's not about efficiency. It is about what works and what doesn't, about what is sustainable. These beekeepers are forest guardians. As they distribute the hives over the forest, and as they adapt to the natural movements and characteristics of wild bee colonies, they provide nesting sites for them. They do not force the bees in a fixed hive. It is the bees who choose the perfect home. This also means that not all of the hives will be occupied, but by providing as many hives a forest beekeeper can, he increases the chances of having more bee colonies in total. It is only through passing on of knowledge and constant observations that these beekeepers are so well adapted to the wild bee colonies. They know they prefer high nesting sites, free from predators or pests near the ground. They know bee colonies prefer to keep distance between each other to minimize the risk of spread of diseases and other pathogens. They have co-evolved with the bee colonies. Once the hives are in place, the beekeepers will return only when it's time to harvest honey from the colonies after the flowering of one of the main local nectar sources. They will visit all the hives, and by looking at the entrance of the nest, they judge whether a colony is strong enough to harvest honey from. Those who aren't are left alone for a harvest in the next season. They will only harvest the honey from one end, opposite to the entrance, and will only take as much as honey a bee colony can afford to lose. The bees are not killed in the process, which is a vital part of keeping the wild honeybee population intact. Now, this type of beekeeping ensures that these forests have the most healthy honeybee population possible through survival of the fittest. If a colony appears not to be strong enough to cope with a disease, it will die and remove its genes from the gene pool. Something we do not allow to happen anymore with our constant urge to medicate and need of control living beings. Local style beekeeping is threatened. They are being told they're doing it wrong and that they will need hives with removable frames, which are very expensive. Governments are employing terms like productivity and modern beekeeping to dismiss forest beekeeping and introduce frame hive beekeeping, which are, by the way, in no way modern, having been patented in 1852. Mad projects are being invented to replace local style beekeeping by frame hive beekeeping. They are expensive, they demand a different kind of colony management, and will need to be stationed near ground in an apiary, increasing risk of disease transfer. A lot of money is being wasted on these types of projects. These honeybees are the same species as those used in industrialized beekeeping worldwide, and none of those managed honeybees populations anywhere in the world are healthier than those here in the forest of southwest Ethiopia. These honeybee populations are strong, healthy, resilient, perfectly adapted to the local environment. The honey that is produced is the purest honey, with no source of pollution within miles of the nest. It provides a local strong economy, with honey traders in every village. Now, this lady in the village of Wonga sells more than 5,000 kilograms of honey each year, and she's not the only honey trader in this village. I like to finish with something remarkable that has stayed with me ever since. I'm a beekeeper myself, as I said in the beginning, and experienced a lot of challenges with my bees. And probably you as well have heard different news items about how bad the bees are doing in the world, with massive yearly honeybee colony losses. We asked the beekeepers in southwest Ethiopia what their biggest challenge was with the honeybees. After thinking long and discussing between each other, they could think of only one thing. One thing that was sometimes a hurdle for them regarding the honeybees was that when making a hive, nuts in wood could create an extra hole. Astonished, this extra hole in the wood has been their biggest beekeeping problem. We realized that Western beekeeping will never be at the level of these real experts. Thank you very much. Now, you've seen I've taken you on a journey to southwest Ethiopia, and now I would like to pass the word to Janet, and she's going to talk about forest beekeepers in Zambia.
Thank you very much, Milan. Great, thanks, Milan. That's really interesting. So I've got some slides to show also, showing forest beekeeping in Zambia. And the title of the talk is Harvesting Nectar Naturally. And that's deliberate because I want to draw attention to the fact that nectar is the primary resource which underpins a beekeeping system, and nectar is a plant resource. So this is a typical forest in Zambia, and when we see forests, sometimes we think about the timber and the woody resources within the forest. But for Zambian beekeepers and farmers, when they look at a forest, they're not looking at the timber resource, they're looking at the floral resource. It's the flowers, the millions of flowers produced by the forest, which is providing the valuable resource that they're interested in. And it's this resource which is harvested as honey. It's an extremely valuable forest product, one that can be harvested sustainably year after year without harming the integrity of the forest. So I'm talking about Zambia, which is in the south middle, as it were, of Africa, in the middle of Africa's Miombo forest region. So Miombo forests, unlike the rainforests of Congo and West Africa, are seasonal and deciduous. And the season, cold, dry, hot, dry, then wet. The honeybees, which are indigenous to these forests, follow this season. And what happens in Africa's Miombo woodlands is important because they're very extensive, covering many, many nations, as this map shows. So what I'm talking about that's occurring in Zambia's Miombo woodlands is also occurring in other nations in Africa, in this Miombo region. They support very many people. Millions of people are directly or indirectly living in these Miombo landscapes, and they're important for carbon storage. And they support a huge indigenous honeybee population that are living naturally in these forests. It's their natural habitat, and they're feeding on the nectar and pollen of these forest trees. And whereas honey hunters may harvest honey from wild nests, forest beekeepers have taken the economic decision to make beehives or provide additional nesting cavities. And these are important because they're owned, so that the harvest, the honey within the hive belongs to that beekeeper. There's no uncertainty about who is going to harvest, as it is with a wild product. The location is known. They've placed the hive in a certain place. They don't have to search, and they can add more. So more nest sites. They're increasing the success rate of the wild swarms which are looking for nest sites, because it's the nesting sites which become limiting before the nectar resource. The forest beekeepers make the hives out of bark, which they get from the same forest from the same trees in the same forest. They site the hives in trees, and they allow them to be occupied by wild swarms. They have many hives, and they're located at distance from one another. So if you stand in the forest and look and see a beehive, you'll only see one. You have to walk for some minutes before you see the next one. And these are located at distance to avoid competition between the honeybees. Having located the hives, the beekeepers then allow the honeybees just to their life cycle to take its natural course in terms of feeding, reproducing, and foraging. There's no interference from the beekeepers until the time of honey harvest. And the beekeepers are looking at the forest. They see the forest as their unit of production, or their forest area, their hive site, where they're locating their hives. And one beekeeper may be keeping bees in 100 hectares. And that resource is their apiary, as it were. And in that site are the trees to make hives, the trees to hang hives, the bees themselves, and the nectar-bearing trees. And it's this site, it's the forest which they consider, and all the bees within that site, which they consider to be their unit of production, not a single colony. So they don't manage an individual colony, they manage the whole, and they value all the resources of the forest that underpin their beekeeping, and seek to maintain all these resources. And the forest beekeeping actions are one and the same as their forest management actions. They don't distinguish between a forest decision, a decision about the forest, or a decision about the forest resources and their beekeeping within this forest beekeeping system. So they're using bark, and in taking the bark off the tree, the tree will die, but their rate of use is matched by the natural regrowth and replenishment rate of the forest. Their system is so extensive in terms of over thousands of square kilometers that the rate of use in terms of the tree use is sustainable. But also, very importantly, the nectar resource is produced, the trees flower at the height of the hot season, the dry season. And there is a concern about fire harming the blossoms. So beekeepers take an action to reduce this fire risk by reducing the flammable material. And they do this earlier in the year by carrying out an early burning regime. And in doing so, they're protecting the blossoms, they're protecting their bees, and they're protecting the regrowing forest and the saplings, which are particularly damaged when late season fires concerned. And these fire mitigation actions, they're applying to their entire hive site, which, as I've mentioned, collectively, with many thousands of beekeepers, we're talking about many thousands of square kilometers of forest. The harvest, they'll harvest the honey. This is export quality honey, and it's exported to Europe. They're very particular about only harvesting ripe honey, because if they mix it with unripe honey or with brood, then that reduces the quality of the honey, which then diminishes the salability. So they're very careful to only take the honey. And of course, they don't interfere with the brood because they need the bees in subsequent years. And it's a very important source of livelihood for many thousands of beekeepers. So in conclusion, we begin to understand that forest beekeepers are adapting their beekeeping to the natural system rather than the other way around. They're not trying to change or manipulate the natural system in order to produce their honey. And this system supports livelihoods and it supports forests. So thank you very much. Great. So I think now we're going to, I'm now going to introduce the first of our films, which is in Ghana. And so we're moving to a honeybee population living in around Lake Volta. Local people collect honey from the wild bees from the forests, but the activity has now been deemed illegal, the honey hunting activity, since the area was made into a national park. So beekeepers are learning now to make purpose-made nesting sites, otherwise known as beehives. However, in all other respects, the hived bees continue to live and forage and reproduce in the same way as wild bees. Thank you very much. So we're now going to see the film from Ghana.
I'm Isaac, working for Bees for Development Ghana. Let me now tell you a bit about our work with forest beekeepers in Kwewu Plains, in the eastern region of Ghana, located on the fringes of the Dija National Park. The Dija National Park was created as a wildlife reserve to help stabilize the Volta Lake. The Volta Lake Basin offers some of the best habitat for bees in Ghana. Fringe communities comprises people evicted from the park in the 1980s. These have remained remote areas where poverty is severe. Several men in these communities go into the park to find bees' nests, take honey, and this is vital to them, but illegal to the park officials, leading to a lot of conflict. We started working with them in May 2019. Currently, there are over 800 hives in the apiaries of about 400 beekeepers most of whom were honey hunters. We have taken them through hive making, harvesting, and the men who were honey hunters were pleased of this much simpler and safer process. There has been an enthusiastic take-up by a wide cross-section of the communities. The first batch of the early established colonies produced some honey and beeswax during the harvesting season of February and March 2020. This successful result formed the basis for other communities to request for inclusion in the project. We are now looking into setting up a honey collection and processing center to ensure this delicious organic honey can reach discerning palates further afield and to trade premium organic beeswax, otherwise called pure gold. Thanks for watching.
You can view more footage by Isaac and follow these beekeepers' progress on the Bees for Development YouTube channel, and there should be a link in the chat. Forest people know bees and how to behave around them. Bees are not livestock. Whether they nest in tree cavities or in woven hives or wooden boxes does not change that. The point of providing bees with man-made hives in places like those we saw in the last video from Ghana is to increase the availability of a beekeeper's known nest sites. This means safer, easier, and more predictable harvests. In the next video we will show you, our friend Neto tells us about his work in the Amazon of South Suriname. There, he assisted indigenous and maroon communities to transfer colonies of native bees into hives and to create the right conditions for them to breed. Honey is medicine and a very special tonic food for these people. In recent years, demand for honey and propolis from native bees has exploded in Brazil, making it all the more important to find sustainable ways of getting more of these products to market. The bees in the video are Tetragonisca angustola, which are tiny and have a very different life cycle to Apis mellifera, which is the most commonly kept honeybee worldwide. You will see, for example, that they store honey in very small pot-like structures and that beekeepers harvest the small volumes of precious honey with a syringe. This is one of hundreds of species of stingless bees in the Amazon, which are key to conserving its biodiversity. Developing sustainable beekeeping techniques with indigenous people is essential to ensuring their future. So here goes Neto showing you about this beekeeping in the Surinamese Amazon.
Hi, my name is Neto. I'm Brazilian and I'm now speaking from Manaus. I'm currently part of ACT Brazil team, but I'm here to tell you how I have supported ACT Suriname on implementing the stingless bee project in the indigenous villages of South Suriname around 3 years ago. The bee project arose from support requests of the trio indigenous people to search for sustainable alternative livelihoods from their forests, motivated by growing interest on some industrialized goods and consequent income generation needs. The stingless bees were identified as one of the main possibilities, since the trios, as well as most people of the forest over the entire Amazon, traditionally use the stingless bee products as a substantial part of their nutrition, medicine, to build crafts and tools, and even as part of their cosmology. These bees are traditionally hunted, which means that their nests are completely destroyed after the products are harvested, and normally the nesting trees are felled. So our goal with the support was to contribute with the knowledge and simple technology necessary to keep these bees in hive boxes, which allow the locals to sustainably harvest the honey and to multiply the number of hives by splitting them. In partnership with a local company, we have established a product chain for propolis, a product made of plant resin stored by the stingless bees, which after processing is used as medicine. And currently there is already a source of income for the locals engaged in the project. The honey product chain is yet to come, as the locals increase the number of hives, which are now around 200 in total. So far, We had very positive results with current engagement of around 20 families in 2 villages, which has served as a showcase to expansion to interested people in other villages.
Yes, thank you, Netu, for this great video. Wonderful to get this insight of the stingless bees and how this helps local people to strengthen their livelihoods. I would like to introduce the next film from our partner organization, the Keystone Foundation, located in the Nilgiri Hills in the Western Ghats in India. In this video, you will see how trees are vital as nesting sites for the giant cliff bees and how logging operations threatens the livelihoods of indigenous honey hunters. The Keystone Foundation actively works to bring attention to the importance of trees for bees and people. Here's the film of Keystone Foundation. If it's on.
So Keystone Foundation, we are based in Nilgiris, but way before we based ourselves here, we have been involved with bees and doing one survey in Tamil Nadu across some 11 hill areas, lots of communities where the main topic was related to bees, honey, trees, what's happening to the landscape, how come bees are becoming less, was one of the guiding motivations for us to start this work itself. So I think very closely involved with honey hunting communities. They are indigenous people who gather honey from different bee species in this area, and some of them are known for their skills to scale high cliffs and get honey from the Apis dorsata. But other than cliffs, the maximum honey collection happens on trees. So the importance of forests and big trees, where the which are the nesting sites of these bee colonies, is absolutely important for the survival of the forest, for the survival of these livelihoods, and for generally pollination and other aspects to continue in this ecosystem.
Here in the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, we have a very high cover of forests and grasslands, and a lot of plantations that have tree cover. Habitats are a very important factor for the survival of wild bees. And here we have, we've often seen the Apis dorsata bees looking for those kind of spaces like tall trees or ledges and overhangs for their nesting sites. Trees play an important role in supporting that kind of population of wild bees, and it's an important part of providing habitats for bees. Considering this need for nesting spaces for bees when there have been logging operations, these have actually cost habitats and nesting sites for bees, and we go into these things without thinking about all the cascading effects on bees.
So I think much has changed, but with some of our interventions, we've managed to kind of build a good livelihood avenue for the people, and bring the story of honey gathering in these regions and the importance of trees, which are bee trees, and which are the tropical forest trees which these bees forage on, and those pollen and those nectars are kind of identified. So a lot of study and a lot of action has happened in this region for bees and trees.
Well, thank you to Sneh, Pratim and all the wonderful folk at Keystone for that film about bees in the Nilgiri Hills and the work that they're doing to protect the forests, to protect the bee populations there, and to help maintain the livelihoods of the people who live within the forests. So now we're going to turn to our last film about Britain. And this is about restoring a wild bee population in the Wye Valley. There have been honeybees in Britain since the last ice age. Where we have good, diverse ecosystems, we have plentiful wild bees, honeybees, as well as bumblebees and solitary bees. They are, as we said before, part of our indigenous fauna. They coexist happily, all our bees together, wherever the land is not depleted of its natural floral resources. And trees provide the best resource we can offer them. So now let's look at a film about bees in the Wye Valley. We knew from our work with Bees for Development that honeybees can be healthy and thrive. They are surviving the parasites and the problems that we humans have introduced to them. We knew too that the conditions for a healthy population of our native honeybee exists here, high above the Wye Valley. Broad-leaved woodland along the river and hillsides gives abundant pollen and nectar through spring and summer. High pasture and hay meadows flower till late summer. Hilltops of rocky scrub and bog, old conifer plantations returning to heathland and bramble. These support not just our bees, but all our native insects. Bees need these three things: an unpolluted and abundant environment, the freedom to reproduce and adapt to their circumstances, and the freedom to live their natural lives without interference. It's good for all our bees, our bumbles and our lovely solitary bees. They allow the whole population of bees to become resilient. It may be marginal land in agricultural terms, but it's paradise for bees. We collected swarms from local wild colonies within a few miles, swarms that appeared far from any beekeeper. These first swarms were hived and the bees allowed to swarm freely in following years. We put up nest boxes, log hives, bee houses, high in the trees to attract the swarms. These bees would be far beyond any interference, not fed, not treated, not harvested. Regular swarming lets the bees adapt and evolve each year. The break in brood keeps the bees healthy. Plenty of drones ensures that queens mate well, and the bees can develop their resistance to mites. We watched the bees swarm. We watched them make their own choices where to live. Many left to populate the woods, barns, church walls, and tree cavities around the valley. And many moved into our nest boxes. They became mother colonies for more swarms every year. Each year, the population became healthier and stronger. Sometimes we collect swarms and we run them into simple, natural, frameless hives. We can give swarms to neighbours and friends who want to start beekeeping. In good years, we harvest honey and wax. Hives are placed far from each other. Bees like to put distance between themselves and other colonies. And we make sure there are always enough flowers for all our native bees, not just honeybees, but bumbles and solitary. We harvest the fruits of the bees' labours in our orchards too. Their pollination gives us fruit and seeds. The bees have been thriving for 10 years now without sugar feed or chemical treatment. A healthy and resilient population is spreading across the hills. It's possible anywhere. The bees need a place that's abundant in flowers and unpolluted by agrochemicals. They need the freedom to mate, to reproduce and adapt, and they need little or no interference from us. Trees provide so much of what the bees and all our wild creatures need. Nourishment from millions of flowers, shelter, nest sites, health in the form of the plant resins which bees turn into propolis. Where forests are healthy, bees are healthy. And where bees are healthy, beekeepers can harvest their gifts without harm. Thank you. Great, thanks. So, just to wrap up, you've seen our films, you've heard our speakers, and I hope what's come across is that bees and trees are interdependent. Healthy forests enable the bees to stay healthy, and beekeepers are guardians of those forests. So we're going to turn to some questions now. We've got some questions coming through on our chat here. We have to finish in about 10-15 minutes, but we will have a Zoom room afterwards if anyone wants to ask more questions or chat with the panel. And please do stay if you can. If you can't, have a look at our website, beesfordevelopment.org, and find out more. But we would love to hear from you. So let's have a look at these questions coming through. We've got one for Milan about the Ethiopian film.
Yeah.
Milan, are you using herbs to prepare the hives?
So if you're asking if I use herbs personally for my hives, what is done, but I don't think the question is, but I will answer that question. It's often lemongrass, which attracts swarms, and we found that the herbs they've used in southwest Ethiopia was also herbs similar to lemongrass, if I'm not mistaken. But you're welcome to chat about it in the Zoom room afterwards, because there might be someone who remembers exactly the herb. But let's keep it with a type of lemongrass that the bees really like.
Thank you. So we have another question, which is, which bee species are beekeepers working with in each of these geographical locations? And I think I think perhaps if I go to Janet to introduce the Apis mellifera, and then Giacomo about the stingless bees, perhaps, and Milan can talk about Asian honeybees. Oh, I can't hear you, Janet.
Oh, sorry. So honeybees the indigenous honeybee in Africa is Apis mellifera, which is the same species as the European honeybee, but of course different in terms of subspecies and races and strains. So they have a different ecology, but it is the same species, Apis mellifera. And Apis mellifera is indigenous to Africa and Europe, and not elsewhere, where it's been imported to other parts of the world.
Thank you. Giacomo, do you want to say something about stingless bees?
Yes, so Apis mellifera is not native to the Americas. It was brought there. But in the Amazon, there are over 400 species of stingless bees. And the ones we saw in the video are Tetragonisca angustura, which I think Becca, our volunteer, has kindly posted the spelling in the chat. And this is not the only bee that is kept in hives and that is used by local people. There are several other. Most of them are of the Melipona genus. And then the Asian honeybees are different again, as Milan told me.
Yes. So the one you've seen in the video, they are Apis dorsata. They're also called the giant honeybee because they're the biggest of the apis. And they hang. Unlike, for example, the Apis mellifera, who nests in the cavity, they hang under. Can I say that? Open in the open, out in the open. So that's Apis dorsata. That's the one they've Keystone Foundation talked about in the video. But of course, you got different ones as well. That's Apis florea or Apis cerana, and all have their different kind of specialities and characteristics.
Thank you. And yes, the wonderful thing about bees is that there are so many different species, and I think perhaps 9 species of what we would call honeybee, and all the hundreds of different species of stingless bees that Giacomo's mentioned. And many of them have been part of the medicine of people all over the world for thousands of years. And it's some of these traditions and the knowledge and skills of the beekeepers who work with these bees in almost every part of the world that we seek to cherish and protect and promote. So let's move on. Janet, there's a question for you. Can you, in Zambia, can you use livestock to trample vegetation around the trees to minimize fire risk later in the season? This from someone, I'm sorry, I don't see people's names here.
Yes, I saw that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Yes, I saw that question. Well, if there were livestock, in that part of Zambia, people are not livestock keepers, so they don't have livestock. And if they did, of course, they would need to be able to feed the livestock throughout the dry season. So you'd have to be confident that the ecology could support it. And in fact, very often there's a trade-off between livestock and forests, in that you get the best grass growth when there are fewer trees. So they are endeavoring really to maintain the forest, because it's the forest that's producing the nectar. So to start introducing large populations of livestock into that ecosystem would probably require maintaining greater grass growth at other times of year, which would probably work against having a good forest, a good dense forest. So not sure, but I don't think it would be very straightforward to achieve that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Shall I answer? I saw another question about the sustainability of. Shall I go ahead, Monica?
Yes, please do. Please do.
So I saw a question about the sustainability of honey harvest in terms of export. So these forests are very extensive, and there is a huge honeybee population collecting tons of nectar. So there is a large population, there is a large yield of honey, and local people do not consume all the honey, and some of it is bought and sold locally. Of course, there is a local trade. People use it for making beer brewing, and they sell it within the country, but there is a surplus. And in fact, the export does mean that this surplus keeps the honey price high. If there was no export, there would be a surplus of honey, and that would cause the honey price there would be a surplus compared to the demand, and that would cause the honey price to collapse. And in fact, it's that high honey price which creates the incentive for the beekeepers to maintain the forest, because it's supporting their livelihood. It means they can make an income from the forest. There are, of course, other options in terms of land use. So, for example, growing maize is an alternative. but maize requires the complete removal of forests. But farmers find that it's they can earn a sustainable livelihood by maintaining the forest and selling honey. I mean, they're also farmers. They grow food as well, of course. But in terms of getting a cash income, this sale of honey is very important. So in terms of sustainability, I think if there was any danger, honey was, and the sale of honey was undermining the beekeeping system or undermining the production system, then over the years we would see a falling off of supply if the honeybee population was under threat or it wasn't being sustained. But that's not the case. It is not falling. The supply is not diminishing. It is being sustained, and it's been going on for, I mean, more than 100 years.
Oh. And beekeeping generally has, or beekeeping and honey hunting has been going on for 10,000 years.
Yes, yes. But at this, in terms of as a trade.
Yeah. Thank you. Shall we just stay in Africa for our next question? We've got a question which is, how do beekeepers in Africa protect themselves from stings? Do Milan, do you or Janet want to talk about PPE?
Well, that really depends on where you are, and if you will visit one place, even between villages or between areas, it will be different. Now, they use smoke, but yeah, again, kind of depends on. Janet, maybe.
If they have, they will, but they tend not to have, and they will. Yes, they use smoke to calm the bees, just as many beekeepers do the world over. But also they'll make decisions about the time of day that they will harvest. The approach, the skills, the techniques they use. I think, Milan, interestingly, you were showing some of the beekeepers who were not very well clothed. Actually, by wearing fewer clothes, then the bees don't get stuck. Actually, it's when bees get stuck in you, that's when, or in your clothing, on your hair, that's when they're more likely to sting. However, I mean, that's a particular thing they do in Ethiopia. I don't think they do that in Zambia, but it's usually it's smoke to calm the bee.
And as Janet also mentioned, the time of day. For example, if there are other beekeepers out there now watching, you wouldn't think of opening your hive during the night, but it's often the other way around. You would actually open the beekeepers in Africa, or can't really generalize, but for example, Southeast Ethiopia, they will wait until early night so that they can still see a little bit, and the bees are calm.
Thank you. Now, I wonder if we've got time just for one more question before we move across to the Zoom room. How important are mason bee species for agriculture and horticulture in the UK and elsewhere? Well, I think I'd just say to this that mason bees are just some of our solitary bees here. They don't store volumes of honey, but all our bees are incredibly important for pollination, and we should all strive to have as much variety and diversity of bee species in all our environments as we possibly can, because they each have their role and they each have their plants and their function in our ecosystems. So they are very, very important. On a commercial level, bumblebees are probably becoming more important now, but that's a whole other issue that is one for discussion elsewhere. It's now, I think we've got only a couple more minutes. Perhaps we should move across to the Zoom room, and then we can take...
There was a question, I don't know, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. There was a question about trees in the UK, I think, about the importance of trees.
Yeah.
The trees
Well,
in
the trees in the UK,
yeah.
if we answer that very quickly, trees, you want trees that flower at all different times of the year. So you'd be looking at a diversity from willow and hazel in the spring, through your fruit trees, through sycamore is good later in spring. We're looking at then lime trees are brilliant, and honeybees, of course, spread with lime trees. After the last ice age, when lime trees arrived in Britain, so did honeybees, and they're incredibly important to the health of bees at swarm time. We're looking at sweet chestnut trees, and then much later in the year, the ivy, which isn't normally called a tree, but is really, really important for the winter survival of bees. So really just have as many trees as possible, and the trees that bees like with many, many flowers.
May I just add that I see another question was, what is the most simple structure that can be put into a tree as a place bees might choose, UK bees? The structures you saw in Monica's videos are the Bees for Development bee houses, which you can buy from our web shop, and they're made by Thorn, and they have the perfect size that swarms will choose. And if you strap that up to a tree, it's, well, we hope, and that a nice swarm will move in.
Yeah, it will.
Many people who have had swarms move in.
Yeah, they will move in. The loss of nest sites in old trees, tree cavities, is one of the greatest problems for our wild bee populations now. They're desperate to find good places to nest, which are safe. So putting up nest boxes is an excellent strategy, and you don't need to call yourself a beekeeper any more than if you put up nest boxes for birds. You wouldn't call yourself a blue tit keeper, but you still have lots and lots of nest boxes. You can do the same for bees. Good. So thank you very, very much, and let's try and move across to the Zoom room, and I hope that we'll see many of you there. And thank you from all of us.
And thank you all for coming.
And thanks very much to our fantastic tech team at Oxford Real Farming Conference, who have done wonders with the complex technology that we're all dealing with. It's wonderful. And thank you.
Thank you, everybody. See you in a few minutes.
Bye from Bees for Development.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye.